high school history teacher was going to require our class to go down and listen to a politician of all things speaking at the old convention center. And we were all kind of complaining until they required it was 25% of our marks or not.
The Honourable Lloyd Axworthy, a visionary Canadian leader who redefined diplomacy through human security. As Minister of Foreign Affairs, he led the creation of the Ottawa Treaty, banning landmines worldwide and saving countless lives. From Parliament to the World Refugee and Migration Council, his lifelong mission has been protecting people, not just borders.
This is Silent Killers, a podcast from Face to Face and the international campaign to ban landmines. In 1997, the world said enough and signed the Mine Ban Treaty, but landmines are still claiming lives in many countries around the world. In this series, we meet survivors, frontline workers, and global changemakers, all fighting for a mine-free world. From Cambodia to the Ukraine, the danger is real. The work is urgent, and the path to peace is possible. Step by step, and yet still under our feet. This is Silent Killers. Well, welcome back to Silent Killers. I'm not exactly sure what episode we're on currently, but this is all, as you probably know as a listener, pre-taped interviews. And we have the Honourable Lloyd Axworthy here with us today. I mean, what a thrill and a pleasure for me. He's a scholar, he's a human rights advocate and activist, and been involved in international issues for so many years. Lloyd, what a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you.
Thank you for the invite. Nice to be here.
So, Lloyd, let's just really quickly set a bit of context. I barely scratched the surface on your history and where you've come from and where you are today and the work that you've done. Foreign Affairs Minister, Nobel Prize, Ottawa Treaty, which is what we're here to talk about today, and the implications. Looking back, what are some of the thoughts and words you have, for me and for our audience right now, with all the work the ground you've covered?
Well, David, if you don't mind, I'd like to make a plug. I just published my memoir about life and politics, and it required me to kind of go back and think about all those things that were my roots and matters of that kind. And I think there's all kinds of things that came together. But I grew up in the north end of Winnipeg, and family was a United Church, and we were full of social gospel, full of sermons and advice. And my mother was a very strong kind of community person. And from there, we all got the opportunity to go to Princeton on a graduate scholarship, and then in the wonderful 60s, and went into the civil rights marches and Vietnam marches. And I learned a great deal about the incredible power and influence of the United States. I also discovered that I was a Canadian. And then I came away with the belief, I guess, David, just one anecdote that I think maybe sums it up. I think when I was about 17 years old, high school history teacher was going to require our class to go down and listen to a politician of all things speaking at the old convention center. And we were all kind of complaining until they required it was 25% of our marks or not. So we went, and it was a turning point. That politician was none other than Lester Pearson and Mike Pearson, who had just come away from winning the Nobel Peace Prize for his work on peacekeeping. And he talked about what being a Canadian meant, that we could do things. We weren't a big power. We didn't flex our muscles or kind of push people around, but we knew how to build bridges. The fact that we had a country built on the kind of some principles of the First Nations people, Native people, French and English. Pluralism became part of our who we were. So I got to the point where I first ran for election in 1973. So I was in politics for about 27 years. I ran for member of parliament in 79. Was there for 21 years, and I was a minister of employment, a minister of immigration, a minister of transport, and a minister of foreign affairs. And that's where I think the story begins.
Lloyd, what did you do in your spare time? That's the question.
I got married to an amazing woman, and we we've had a wonderful son, and we're now going to celebrate our 45th anniversary in a couple of weeks.
Congratulations. So the book is, I think, just Lloyd Axworthy, My Life in Politics, is it not?
That's right. Yeah.
Yeah. So pick it up. I'm looking forward to reading it. Lloyd, if I could do another plug for an earlier book of yours, Navigating a New World, it had a huge impact on my life personally and hundreds of students that I taught over the years at Humber College here in Toronto. And I used to teach an Introduction to International Development course. And we got into, the issues. We got into the ethics. We got into just how complicated these things were. So I love the title, though, and I'd love to talk about that maybe as a little bit of a segue into what we're trying to navigate today. I mean, Navigating a New World was written many years ago. The title still applies. In fact, it's probably going to apply in perpetuity.
And in some ways, David, it's an extension of that kind of navigation, which is there's no sort of GPS or navigational tools. You have to kind of do as the Tahitians do. You get in your canoe and you watch the birds and put your hand in the currents and follow the advice of the elders, and you go from Tahiti to Hawaii. It's almost, is a kind of a form of navigation that is what the indigenous people really call radical hope. You have to keep believing in things. You're not sure how you're going to get there. And we're in that position now. I mean, what's the old line from the Italian philosopher? The old order is dying, the new one hasn't been born, and in between are the monsters.
Lloyd, I don't know if you touch on this in your new book, but the notion of radical hope, if that's not the title, if that's not the campaign and the bumper sticker and the T-shirt and the mantra for all of us, as we start to talk about this thing called the Ottawa Treaty and disarmament and landmines, how do you maintain that?
It's not easy. I think there's a regression going on from where we were. I mean, in the 90s, there was an openness. The Berlin Wall had come down. The Cold War was ending. We were all looking for new signposts. And when I went into foreign affairs, there was a really very high talented group of foreign service officers. I had some very smart people on my staff. We consulted with a lot of Canadians, and we went back to the UN sort of 1984 notion of human security. Protection of people is as important as protecting nation states and governments and so on. And so we use that as our framework, and we use that as a base of foreign policy for the next several years. And in many ways, it still continues. I'm afraid we have a new government in Canada that isn't following that track. I think the new foreign minister is basically rejecting it, but that's the way the world goes. So I think, but Canada for a long time had this notion of liberal internationalism, and I think that human security was a very direct, pragmatic policy format for that.
I remember, Lloyd, in the course that I taught and being introduced to Pearson and his book, Partners in Development, and I can't quote it directly, but the first chapter of the book was just kind of mind-blowing here, with Robert McNamara being on the committee, written in the 60s. And basically the paragraph or two that I remember so succinctly is, you could take that out, put it in the Toronto Globe and Mail or the New York Times today, and it would still apply.
It would, for sure. Yeah. So anyway, and that's what really, I guess, was the trampoline from which we went to the issue of landmines. Canada had been involved in the discussions that went on in Geneva at the UN sort of conference on disarmament, which, as I describe in my book, is an abattoir where issues go to die. I mean, nothing comes out of it. It's set up so that great powers could basically kill any proposition they didn't like. But there had already been, as you know, the ICBL had been formed. I like to point out to people it was an American initiative. It was the Vets for Vietnam who set up the ICBL and paid for it and got the whole thing started. And
people really need to hear that, Lloyd.
Yeah, they do. And Senator Pat Leahy was the leading spokesperson in the Senate, and Bill Clinton was the first person to make a speech at the General Assembly calling for a treaty. So in all those ways, I think there's some real sort of pedigree for the United States. until, politics changes these things.
Well, you look back and you start to see somehow those dots connect. And I would imagine your new book, another little plug here, My Life in Politics, Lloyd Axworthy, get it wherever you buy good books. I would imagine that's a lot of what you're doing. What does Kierkegaard say?
That's right.
The philosopher Kierkegaard, right? You make connections and you understand the past when you look back.
Yeah, that's right. But so anyway, this is an issue that was already there. But when I first came in, I think the spirit carriers in the department who were really leading the issue of landmines suggested that we hold a conference in Ottawa to kind of bring the parties together, see if we could renegotiate some consensus. That was in '96. Everybody came together, but the same, the big guys were playing games. The NGO community was for it. And there was a kind of group of like-minded smaller countries, Canada, Netherlands, Norway, Austria, Mozambique, Chile. I mean, there was a pretty widespread, including Cambodia, by the way, which was a major factor because they were the ones who really paid the price. And it wasn't going anywhere. The same kind of stalemate occurred. And I'll just tell you the story. I wrote about it and saying that sometimes, the old Harry Truman phase, the buck stops there. Well, on a Friday night, I convened the officials and staff and said, so we have to shut this meeting down tomorrow. What do you think we're going to do? And we went, they said, well, the whole thing is sort of nothing, no traction. And then one of them said, now, we don't know if you're feeling kind of cheeky or not, but here's an idea. Well, why don't you get up and invite everybody to come back to Ottawa a year from now and sign a treaty on landmines, banning it? And I said, "Oh, that is cheeky." But anyway, we did some checking with the Prime Minister's office, with the Secretary General, with the ICBL people. They thought it was worth a shot. So the next morning, I got up and did my sort of normal salutation at the end of the meeting. Nice to have you all here. And too bad that we can't be any action, but here's what I put out. I'm going to invite you to come back a year from now and sign a treaty. And the NGOs sort of applauded. The big guys scowled. The other countries wondering, what the hell is he doing? My own media thought I'd gone crazy. That what's the country like Canada sort going to take this on? But we did. And the following year, in December, we got the treaty signed. It was a remarkable partnership between civil society and governments. I think I'm sure you've gone through this. It was something that
it's incredible, Lloyd.
Yeah, we had. There's always been consultation. This wasn't consultation. This is full partnership, and we were able, therefore, to march what I call the Amway campaign. We basically knock on every door.
Knock on every door. I love it. Yeah, don't leave anyone behind.
That's right,
Lloyd. I would imagine there's no one thing that sort of tipped it for you, or that was, let's say, the spark. I mean, clearly it was the work you were doing, reigniting this notion of human security. I mean, it's been said that you were one of the few who really popularized that idea and brought it sort of back to the forefront. When you look back, I mean, other than this question of, hey, why don't we get back together in a year? Was that kind of the tipping point, or is this just about being sort of a little bit in the right place?
David, there was another tipping point that took place, and it I think on the Thursday night while this 96 meeting was going on, my wife and I and our 11-year-old son went to visit an exhibit that was taking place on landmines with the pictures and the videos, and my 11-year-old son was looking at this stuff, and he said, "Why is this all happening?" And we
Lloyd, I'm getting goosebumps, man. Like, seriously, this is unbelievable.
And I said, the problem is these things pop out of the ground. They're hidden. They're silent. They're secret. And I said, and they kill people and they maim people, and particularly innocent people. And he said, "You mean like kids?" And I said, "Yeah, particularly kids." So he said, "Well, Dad, aren't you a foreign minister?" I said, "Yeah, I'm a foreign minister." He said, "Well, why don't you do something then?" That was the tipping point. So there we were.
That's fantastic. For me, it's a beautiful story. My daughter is a vegetarian today because of a photo exhibit that we saw at the Royal Ontario Museum in Toronto. And we walked through and an image struck her just in that moment. She was 6 years old. We ended up having this ethical conversation
Really? Yeah.
It was wild, Lloyd. It sounds a little similar to
Uh,
the situation you were in. And isn't it just an affirmation and a challenge to us all to be willing to engage in the moment? Like, it's a beautiful story.
and David, remember, I had some advantages. I had been, by that time, I was a veteran. I wasn't entry level, and I had been around. I
That's a
had
funny line.
I had been sort of in other ministries. I knew the system. I had a good relationship with Jean Chrétien, our Prime Minister. We had sort of been in opposition together. We knew each other well, and there was confidence. We were both sort of had worked on the kind of the Pearsonian ideals, and I want to make sure that people understand that one of the keys to success of getting the treaty put together is that I said, I'm going to need some money to help other countries come to demonstrate how demining can work, to provide support for this. In the meantime, at the time, our government was going through a major fiscal problem, and the finance minister was cutting anything he could find loose in the street he was going to cut. But I went to the prime minister, and he said, what do you need? I said, 100 million. He said, you have it. And it was that decision that gave us the kind of wherewithal to go out and do it. So, I mean, he really played an important part.
Well, with that kind of financial support, there has to be the relational support as well, the political support, et cetera. That's a remarkable thing. What do you say to leaders today? I mean, with respect to, we've got countries pulling back, the Ukraine war, we've got the disaster that is Gaza, and if you could get them into a room, is there a conversation starter? Is there a way to say, can't we all get on the same page here? Or is it a little more cynical than that?
Well, I think we've been trying to get the Canadian government to sit down with the countries in Eastern Europe who are threatening or are withdrawing. And the concern is that once you start that routine, it really began when Joe Biden agreed to give the Ukraine landmines. I mean,
last November.
Yeah, that was a serious mistake. But I also understand why. I mean, let me put it bluntly. The generals in the Pentagon never did accept the idea there should be a landmine treaty. They've never seen a weapon system they didn't like. And they were advisors to and integrated with all these countries. And every time they got a chance, they said, oh, yeah, well, you need landmines. Well, they didn't. I mean, I think it was actually an American general in the Iraq War who pointed out landmines were more dangerous to the troops, and the rationale being used now by Ukraine and Lithuania and Estonia, that Finland, that somehow they need us to stop Russian aggression, is doing nothing in Ukraine. It has no impact. So it's a false sense
of security.
Yeah, well, not only a false sense, it's a political kind of canard. They're trying to tell the people they're going to do something. Well, this is an easy way to do it. And 70% of the war is being fought by drones. But in the meantime, they're kind of corrupting the ground. I mean, Ukraine's going to be pulling out landmines for the next 100 years. I mean, so will these other countries that plant them.
Well, Lloyd, you brought up Cambodia. We talked about it offline, still removing millions of landmines out of their soil today, 50 years later, after the Khmer Rouge took over Phnom Penh.
That's right. I mean, I think there's always been that kind of pressure from the United States, and the fact the Russians and Chinese, I mean, it's no secret that the more autocratic you become, the more you sort of do anything. You don't care about human security. You don't care whether people are hurt or injured.
Lloyd, is that what it is? I mean, should some of these leaders spend a little bit more time in Sunday school? I mean, I'm being kind of trite for a reason here, I suppose. Like, is it, Don Henley said that actually, back in the day, the man who fell in love with Henry David Thoreau and Walden and a more simpler way of life said, maybe it's about ethics. Maybe it's about valuing others. Because I wanted to ask you, we only have a bit of time left here, but I did want to ask you about, have we forgotten about human security?
Yes.
Wow.
I'm not everybody.
Right.
There's still people out there. It's still being written about. There's still serious efforts to make it work. But I think you've had clearly the authoritarian governments, and now you have Mr. Trump in the White House. There's certainly no empathy for human security in that administration. And in fact, it's quite the opposite. And therefore, I think the problem is, David, that they, in so many ways, they're saying that if we can get away with it, other countries have license to do the same. And so the interesting thing, and that's why I go back to my comment about the role of Americans in getting the landmine treaty going is that you had people there who cared. I mean, I negotiated with Mr. Clinton and our Prime Minister there. I was sort of, Madeleine Albright was a good friend, and we were sort of soul sisters and brothers on these things. There are Americans who see these things, but we don't have to get in the whole political science about why the takeover of the monsters.
Lloyd, it's so ironic and disturbing and tragic that I think if you and I walk the streets of Toronto or Winnipeg or New York City today, I think most people we ran into would say, of course I believe in human security. Of course it's a good thing. Of course I don't agree with landmines. Yes to disarmament. But then when we get together collectively, politically, something breaks down. And I've never understood that. I've worked in the NGO world for 30 years. Happens there too.
David, take it from an old political. The whiff and aroma of power can really sort of change one's psyche and outlook. And that's what it's about. And people, those who are becoming sort of the powers to be, are bouncing off, sourcing out of people's grievances and unhappiness, and all those lessons are taught. So there's a very interesting series on CBC television in Quebec called Empathy. It's not a word that is very often used. I think tragically our own government is going that way. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if we end up becoming a partner in the Golden Dome and other kinds of military fantasies like that, because they see that as we have big lobbies from the defense industries all promoting the idea. And unfortunately, we've got too many people in Ottawa now listening to them.
Is there anything we can do as Canadians, as voters, as campaigners against the landmines and who are advocates for disarmament and so on?
Well, I mean, the classic is, write, call your member of parliament. And I mean, I always worked on the algorithm. And if I got any more than 10 letters, I knew there was a real issue out there. And I just think Parliament has been bypassed by this government and other governments, that they don't treat it with respect. But members of Parliament, I think, can be brought back into play. And right now they're all intimidated by the quote, the power of the leader. And I think that is becoming itself a dangerous trend line in all our democracies. But it's on these kinds of issues, I think that there can be a serious deliberative democracy approach. In my book, I write about how, our parliamentary systems need to be refurbished. We need to reach out at the whole idea of having a much stronger sense of forums and assemblies and engagement. Canadians want to be involved. They don't want to be talked to. And having a top-down system is one way to make sure that people get disengaged.
So we got to wrap up here in a second or two. Lloyd, the podcast is called Silent Killers. Please listen to it. Share it with family and friends. This is just such an important conversation, Lloyd, we're having today. And I've done a lot of these interviews for about 12, 13 years, and they're never finished. They're always just, hey, I've got another question. Which to me is the sign of a great conversation. So listen to podcasts, get engaged, write letters. I love this algorithm of the number 10 for you. And I think that's a super important one. Question for you. How do we get people to think differently about the way things are? And I know that's a huge question, but I'm talking about landmines in particular, because most people I know just don't even know the issue exists. Really, Lloyd?
Well, I'm going to sort of put another plug on your program.
Please do.
My son Stephen has an op-ed in today's Globe and Mail. He's a civics teacher in rural Manitoba, and he wrote an op-ed saying our big problem is we don't teach civics anymore. We train our people in the army to fight and be warriors. We don't educate them as to why we're doing it. What's our democracy about? The general population can't answer the questions about what's the Charter of Freedom stand for. I mean, that whole notion of education, it goes back to John Stuart Mill, who said, democracy needs educated people. Well, if you're simply tuning into social media or TikTok or Instagram, you're not going to get a lot of sort of thoughtful discussion going on. I think it's a huge gap. And Stephen, as a practicing teacher, said, I'm watching this, and it frightens me that students come and they can't tell you what World War II was about. They can't tell you what slavery was. I mean, there's a real ignorance, and therefore people get drawn into the kind of
It all becomes a
radicalism.
distraction at that point.
And so I think, let me say, I think, I'm not saying it's the only starting point, but I think you're right. Podcasts of this kind need to be distributed and listened to and broadened.
Well, I love what Stephen's done. I'll look for the article and we'll do our best to get word on the street about that too. But yeah, it's a variation on the unexamined life is not worth living. Really,
exactly right. That's right.
Yeah, Lloyd, listen, what a pleasure having you here today on Silent Killers and being able just to talk a little bit about your history. And for those of you listening, check out My Life in Politics. Is it Sutherland Publishing? Is that the
Sutherland, yeah. Mm-hmm.
Sutherland Publishing. You can get it wherever you get good books. I'm going to be picking up a copy, Lloyd. I promise
Thank
you
you,
that.
David. I know. That itself is a big plus today for me.
Well, listen, thank you for all the work that you've done. And for those of you also listening, it's icblcmc.org. That's the International Campaign to Ban Landmines. That's their website. And Lloyd, yeah, I feel like we have another conversation coming down the road.
Let's do that.
But what a pleasure having you here with us today. Thanks so much for your time.
It was my pleasure indeed. Thank you for the invite.
Well, there you have it. That was Lloyd Axworthy here on Silent Killers, and it was just a real pleasure for me. You could probably hear it in the tone of my voice that I was just so thrilled to have him with us on the show, talking about the landmine ban treaty, the Ottawa Treaty, some of the challenges and the affirmations. I think for me, one of the big takeaways is this idea of radical hope that we can do something and that we are doing something and that we need to engage on a variety of different levels. I hope you learned something. I know I did, and I hope you enjoyed it. And please share this with family and friends. Sign up wherever you listen to subscribe to podcasts, whether it's Apple or Spotify. Please do Silent Killers, and we're looking forward to getting the word on the street. So it's. And if this is your first listen, first episode, please check out the ones that have come before. It's a 10-episode series, and it's something that I hope people are going to be listening to for years to come. The thing is, this is a problem that can be solved, and yet there are so many challenges ahead. But again, let's take away that idea of radical hope, that reach, I believe it was Elizabeth Barrett Browning who said that reach beyond our grasp. That's what we're here for. That's what this is all about. Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining in. You've been listening to Silent Killers. My name is David Peck.